Hey everyone, it's time for another video to help you liberate your mind. So today, I want to talk to you about a really important subject. Not a lot of people get this, and my aim or my intention for doing this video is once people understand what I'm about to tell them, I'm hoping it's going to change the way they talk to themselves, change the relationship that they have with themselves so that they can start to develop a more healthy relationship with themselves. So today's about self-talk, and it amazes me, I say that a lot, it amazes me, just how badly people treat themselves. Not just in the way that they, think and talk about themselves, but also just how their lifestyle is. And I'm going to try and break this down a little bit today so that people can get a real understanding of where that's coming from and why we have to start changing the way that we do relate to ourselves. Because there's kind of two parts to us, right? There's the conscious brain, which is the bit at the front, and then we've got the unconscious brain, which runs the body, right? It does all of those really complicated things that we don't need to be aware of that's going on behind the scenes, like our breathing, our blood pumping, our digestive system, immune system, all of these things. And it's really clever that it can do all of that. But what most people don't get is that the unconscious mind emotionally is a bit like a child, which is where we get this expression, the inner child, from. And there's a lot, in a lot of us, there's a war going on between the conscious adult part of us and that inner child. And people aren't even aware of it. They just, well, let's get into this from the beginning, right? So essentially, as I've said many times before, but for ones that haven't seen any of my videos before, we don't start with a fully formed brain, right? It takes time and we go through stages. And in fact, to at least 21, the front part of your brain, which is where the adult personality lives, isn't fully formed yet, right? So that's why teenagers are very black and white in their thinking. It's why most children are very imaginative, and it's why they take things very personally. Now, what you have to understand is that your unconscious mind is it's unfiltered, which means it doesn't critically assess anything and sort of decide what's important and what isn't. It just takes everything in and absorbs it like a sponge, especially when you're a kid in that learning state. And so even though you can't remember a lot of things consciously, it knows everything that's ever happened, right? So it's a lot better to judge. And it also develops and helps us develop these coping mechanisms, these patterns, these programs that we run on how we deal with the world. So that's the unconscious mind. But emotionally, it's like a kid, right? So what happens then is the older we get, the more this starts to run the show, and the more critical and analytical, and especially if we've had quite a difficult upbringing, it becomes a lot more loud, and we talk about overthinking and worrying and overanalyzing, all of these kinds of things. And what starts to happen then is there is a divide between what we want and how we want things to be and expect the world to be and have expectations of ourselves, and what the inner child or the unconscious mind has kind of created on the way to that moment in terms of trying to keep us safe. Because here's the other thing, your inner child or your unconscious mind's job is to keep you safe. It's to make you feel good. It's to keep you healthy. It's to keep you out of harm's way. But if it's had a really rough start in life, and, home life has been particularly chaotic or aggressive, or if we've been through some scary or very traumatic instances in our lives, your unconscious mind has now developed and built these systems that try and keep you safe to adapt to the environment that you've been brought up in. And unfortunately, it doesn't really change a lot of that unless we get some help from someone like myself, a hypnotherapist or a therapist. Now, what tends to happen then is when we get to a certain age and this starts to run the show a lot more, there's that kind of, as I said, the expectation. So things to be aware of. First of all, it's a child. It remembers everything. It has these programs and it can't speak to you in words. So how it communicates with you is through your emotions and your feelings and your body. And the problem with that, of course, is what do most adults, especially if they're having mental health issues, what do they want to avoid more than anything else? Emotions. They don't want to feel anxiety. They don't want to feel fear. They don't want to feel bad about themselves. They don't want to feel afraid. So what do we do as adults in how we cope with all of that? Especially like people like men, right? They're told purposely, they're trained to not listen to their feelings, not to express their feelings or acknowledge their feelings. Just man up, walk it off, rub some dirt on it, all that kind of stuff, right? So think about what we do. We are either ignoring, or we are medicating, or we are angry and frustrated, and we will do anything to avoid feeling the way that we feel. Now, I want you to use the metaphor of literally there is a child that lives in you that never grows up. And it's going to be a lot easier if you're a parent and you're listening to this. I want you to think about your child. What happens to your child if you ignore it? Or you neglect it? Or you just give it junk food to shut it up? Or you just put it in front of a TV all day? Or if you shout at that child and always say nasty things to it? Or, the list goes on. Think about what we do. But the thing is, we are doing this, we're talking to ourselves, but really we're talking to that unconscious part of our mind, and it takes things very literally. So when I see people with these throwaway comments of, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm an idiot, what an idiot, all these kinds of comments that they're saying about themselves. And even throughout the therapeutic process, right, I still catch that, and I have to point out to them their language. Listen to what you're saying there. Just when you're apologizing all the time, or you're chastising yourself all the time, or, you may be trying to sort out your mental health, but you're still drinking a bottle of wine a night because you don't want to feel the feelings that you feel. So what I want to try and get people to start thinking about is, wouldn't it be better to start treating ourselves and that kid inside of us with some kindness and some encouragement, and, maybe putting some healthier food into the body? Because what happens when you neglect a child for a long period of time? It starts to get sick, or it starts to develop, it starts to cry, it starts to feel bad, it starts to basically break down. And, think about it. That's going on inside of you. So, what a lot of people do, they're not patient with themselves. And even though they don't feel ready, or they feel afraid or whatever, they kind of keep forcing themselves. Or if they're really tired and they just, because I've got to earn money, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And yeah, we all have these, pressures and things that we have to do. But what I'm trying to get at is, when your body stops you, because it runs the body, right? So if you don't listen to your body, which is essentially that inner child, what happens? It will stop you. You get sick. You will start to put on weight. You might have a mental breakdown. You might develop depression when you physically can't get out of bed. And it's funny because it's basically saying, I can't work with this. I've had enough. And then you're getting even more depressed because you're not listening still. You're still not listening. So if you don't listen to those feelings, or you don't acknowledge those feelings, or you actively chastise yourself, eventually it's going to have consequences. But what you don't realize the whole way along is that you've done it to yourself. And a lot of people have this victim mentality where, why does it always happen to me? Why are all these people, reacting to me the way that I am? But it all starts with you. The biggest breakthrough I ever had was the moment when I realized this, and I started to be kinder to myself and more patient with myself. And when those feelings came up, I would comfort myself. So my advice is to start thinking about that. Start talking to yourself and imagining that there is a little kid in here. And it is separate to you in a sense, even though it's all you. Imagine the kid's running the body and you're basically running the show. Because here's the other thing, it knows what's best for you, but you are running the show. And sometimes it will have to step in. And that's why, think about this, right? Imagine that your conscious mind is the navigator saying, I want to go here, I want to go there. This is the map, this is where I want to go. And your unconscious mind is driving the car, the body, right? This is why sometimes when you, the navigator, says, I want to do that presentation, but because the driver of the car knows a lot more about what's happened when we've been to previous presentations, stuff like this, going, no, we're not going there, right? So you're then going to start chastising the driver, but the driver's still driving the car. Do you know what I mean? So do you think it's going to be any better by shouting at the driver and freaking out the driver? What would happen if you were in a car and you were scaring the crap out of your driver? You could crash, right? So many metaphors in there. But again, my main message is this: start to be kind to yourself. Set some time out each week to actually rest and pamper yourself a little bit. And if you feel some anxiety coming up, it's not that terrible thing that's coming out to get you. That is a little kid saying, I need a hug. I need some love. I need some attention. I need a rest. And when you start treating that child properly, instead of child abuse, you're going to start to get better results. Because the other thing is, it can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. So if you're constantly overthinking all the time about all these terrible scenarios that might happen, you're essentially playing horror movies to that child in your brain. And it can't tell the difference. It thinks that's really happening to you. So your coping mechanism is actually freaking out your unconscious mind, and therefore it's stopping you from doing stuff because it thinks the world is a really scary place. So you might need to get some help to get some of these programs and traumas and things released with someone like myself, but it will really help you as you're going through that process or just working on your own to start to treat yourself with kindness and patience and love, even if you don't actually believe it yet. It's like nurturing something. It takes time, but you've got to start sometime. So if you start thinking about it in that way, you're going to start to notice some changes. It's going to start to work with you instead of against you. So I hope that's been helpful. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll speak to you again soon.